Back in 2012, horror fans were doing well in the indie scene. Lone Survivor was one of the biggest hits. That was a survival horror game, much like a Silent Hill or a Resident Evil on a 2D plane, and much like It Came Home by Benjamin Rivers. Ben is a member of the Hand-Eye Society, a group that was created by Miguel Sternberg, our episode 1 guest. He's a self-published comic illustrator, or was before. I'm not sure if he's still doing that now, but he has since done multiple other indie stuff, including Alone With You, which was a cool little visual novel back in 2015, out on basically everything, and Worse Than Death in 2019. This talk is a little bit shorter than some of the others, but I thought it was pretty good, so I hope you enjoy it.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Indie Talks on Pixel Response. As always, I'm Paul, and Nathan is not available to join us tonight, so it's just me, but luckily I have a very special guest. We have the creator of Home on Steam, a unique horror adventure, I guess is the subtitle, Mr. Benjamin Rivers. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad we could make this work.
For sure. Like, we've been going back and forth and had a few issues back and forth with communications, but we're set up, we're all good to go, and I'm happy to be talking to you finally, and maybe, I don't want to get into too many things about, like, the context of your game, but maybe off the air I could ask you some things you were thinking, because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody.
Sure, I know, it's weird, you know, as I've been talking to a few people, it's, or even hearing other people on podcasts talk about it, everyone seems really sensitive about spoiling parts of the game, which is kind of funny.
Right. Like, the thing with Home that I found interesting more than anything is a lot of games that are out right now, they work on like really good programming or a really good gimmick or something mechanically that's really good gameplay wise, and then kind of write a story around it. Or if there's more than one person, then one person works on one thing, the other person works on the other, and they just kind of combine their efforts at the end. Whereas Home seems to really go for more of a narrative, and then the gameplay is just a way to better immerse the person into that narrative.
Yeah, that's totally right. I mean, one thing I sometimes get tired with a lot of games, especially indie games, is that they're all mechanics-first experiences. And as someone who doesn't play games specifically for mechanics, at least not exclusively, to only have a game have its selling point be, you know, it's an action puzzle, or you know, you can double jump or something like that. To me, that's not interesting, because that's not, like, I don't, you know, at 5 o'clock every day, I don't sit there and go, okay, I want to learn how to double jump today, or whatnot. I'm thinking, you know, I want to go to some experience I haven't had before. I want to, follow the story, like you say. So I guess, it was a bit of a response to that.
Right. And, like, just looking at some of your pedigree here and what you've worked on before, one of the bigger ones is a project called Snow, it looks like. Now, I haven't been able to actually do this because I don't have a Kobo or anything like that. I've been meaning to try the game out, but I have seen some of the graphic novel, and I quite like the art in it.
Well, thanks very much.
I wish I had time to just sit down and read it. I will get to it probably in the winter break here, but I'm not able to actually play the game portion because it seems like it's only out for Kobo. Is that right?
There's a print version as well that I have on the site, and there's still copies left of that. So if you don't have an e-reader, there is still a way to order. Obviously, you know, it costs more than getting it through the Kobo store. It also is available through the iBook store. So and it can also be purchased as just a PDF off the site.
Okay, because now I do have I'm part of the Android ecosystem, so I have a Nexus tablet.
Right.
Would I be able to use it like with my Amazon Reader?
It depends on what Amazon chooses. I mean, you can get Kobo for Android, so technically you can go through the Kobo store and it would work there. If you. But I don't know if the Amazon Reader on Android devices reads EPUBs. It should. I mean, they all should. It's a standard format, but I'm not sure. Okay. But worst comes to worst, there's the ebook, which is just a PDF, and that can be read in any PDF reader.
Okay.
Like a good reader or something.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll look into that a little bit more, but it seems like with Snow, it, again, is very narrative-driven, because, it's a graphic novel. So.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, some people may have seen that there is a small game portion to Snow as well that was created during the writing of the graphic novel, and it's just like a little 5-minute adventure game. It's nothing off the charts or anything, but it that was sort of my little experiment at how some of the stuff might work, and you can see some dialogue trees that are working in there. But it was kind of the thing that put the bug in my ear about, hey, I really think this could, I could do something a little bit more with this.
Right. So in a way, it was kind of like the stepping stone to what you did with Home.
Yeah, it was totally for me the proof that even in such a small situation that I guess I wasn't crazy. When I messed around with this a little bit, it seemed like it worked pretty well. And I have to admit it, I got like a ton of great feedback over Snow, like the game, even though it's just like a 5-minute, know nothing adventure game. But it's been used to teach narrative, like constructs and classes and stuff like that. I've heard, so it was pretty neat because for me it was basically just like a learning experiment that I took as part of this program that was here in Toronto.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Okay, so going back to Home, I guess. Home is on Steam now. Is it on like Desura and all that other stuff people can go to?
Right now it's Steam only.
Okay.
I do get emails about this every now and then. It's mostly just to keep my brain from exploding, to not have to support it in 7 places at once.
Right.
I am working on a version of the game that will be coming out at some point next year, sooner rather than later. I don't want to go into too many specifics, but to make it available to other platforms. So there'll be more distribution sort of across the board. But for now, because it's just Windows only, I'm keeping it on Steam. And then once I have a version that's a little bit more cross-platform, then again, you'll see it in a few more places.
Right. So now, with the actual gameplay, without giving too much away,
Right.
You play a character, and it seems almost like a lot of what games try to do these days is throw you into the game and put your avatar or whatever in there. But what this seems to do is that you're narrating this person's life as it's going by. And I've had a few friends that have played it, and we've all talked about it like off air and stuff after. And it seems like each one of our interpretations of some of the stuff that happens has been completely different. So It's kind of neat that with implementing so little actual direct narrative about someone's life and giving the person the option to choose how this person's path is going, and still kind of a linear matter, you're able to get different outcomes just by how people interpreted the certain things. Like, more than anything, you put in specific little, like, it's very atmospheric, but you put in certain little things that people could either choose to do or not do. Like, there's a gun that you can choose to take or not take, and there's a videotape you can choose to, or find thing to play it and stuff like that. But in the end, it's kind of I'm trying to think at the same time I'm talking here. It's not working very well without giving anything away, but the same events happen for everybody, but what I found interesting is everybody interprets it a little bit differently, so every person's adventure is their own still. I'm kind of intrigued about if that was intentional or if it was just kind of a happy mistake that came along.
Oh, right. No, that was entirely the point of the game itself. And there are some things that happen that not everyone will see. Some people don't always notice that, but because I make them a little bit subtle, it's not like a big, obvious branching narrative thing. But no, you're right, that is entirely the point. The thing I have with most games as far as how they deal with narrative is that in most cases, what people consider to be game narrative is simply, a monodirectional story. So the person on the other side, like in a Halo or something like that, is telling you something that's going on. And you're basically playing out the bits between the important parts.
Mm-hmm.
In other cases, there are games that let you, I guess, get a sense of feedback for what you're doing. Bastion's a good example where it is a lot more, it does pay attention to you a lot more. So it's narrating what you're doing as you're doing it.
Right.
But in a slightly more specific way, I feel. Now, I haven't played through all of Bastion, so I don't want to say something stupid that I'll regret. So just from what I played, this is how it seems to me. What I tried to do was, well, I guess what Home does is that it makes a narrative that is impossible without player input.
Right.
Whether you're there or not, there's no default. You could never novelize it. It could never be made into a movie. It's a story that can only exist as a game. Because if you don't do anything or say yes or no or help things along, then as far as the game's concerned, nothing ever happened.
Right.
So people always feel, I think both inside the game industry and out, that more story equals better story.
Right.
You know, for instance, a longer cutscene is a more in-depth story, but it seems like we're a little bit slow to realize that that's not always the case. And I play Metal Gear games, so I can't complain about that too much because, I've made a sandwich at the end of Metal Gear Solid 4 because it was like an hour and a half long cutscene or whatever it was.
Which is not to say it's still not a very valid way of doing it, just
right.
Maybe an overdone way.
it's one way, and it's the way that we seem to have chosen as the way that we make video games, which is too bad because I feel like it's like we've just discovered beef, and the only thing we've learned how to make is hamburgers, and no one's ever tried to do anything else with that.
Right.
Which is a dumb metaphor, but so the idea that if you don't come into it and sort of invest the time, which isn't a lot, I guess, but invest the time to say yes, I want to see this happen, I want to be part of this, then the game doesn't exist and the story doesn't happen. And I've had a lot of people who've had a problem with this, and they've posted negative things or whatnot about it, which is legit because if that's not the experience you're looking for, if you want to kick back and have like a cutscene pass by every 30 minutes or something, and you just want to get something interesting told to you, then home's not the game for you. And there are other people who do that better than I could probably do it. But I really feel like there is a giant hole in the industry where stuff like this doesn't exist. And maybe it's because not everybody wants it, but I'm too stubborn to stop doing it. So,
well, what seems interesting to me is like video games right now in storylines and stuff you see with Mass Effect and certain other games that have come out that there's always an uproar about because video games now are trying to give players more agency in the way the story is told when it's kind of almost impossible to do that because with someone pre-programming something, you have to have that person has to have the agency first and tell you what the story is at the same time you're kind of tricking the player.
Right.
The thing with Home that I found is that even though you have little agency in how the story is told, you have agency over what your experience is, and that seems to resonate a lot more strongly in a player's mind, such as myself, in the end.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not so much about, I made this story, but I lived this story in this way, or I saw this story this way.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone's ever seen my Twitter feed, they can find a link to my blog where I go on a 6,000-page essay about Mass Effect and why I like it. So I don't think we need to be without those kinds of experiences, but that is a different way to do things entirely. And I also think that it's interesting because I took a lot of inspiration from certain Japanese genres that actually never really make it over here, like over to the West, like visual novels and stuff.
Right.
Not that I play a ton of them or think they're the greatest thing ever, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned from them, and I took those into making Home. And a lot of people, I guess a lot more people know this now because of the internet, but for instance, there was a visual novel version of Silent Hill that was released for the Game Boy Advance, and I talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
And the first time I found out about this, I was just blown away. So I think I managed to, cough, emulate it because I wanted to see what it was, and my language skills weren't super great at the time, and I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. But it was the first time I ever played one of those visual novels, and I went, wait, this is great. This is like a radio drama with pictures. Why wouldn't you want to play this kind of stuff? Like, this is such a viable way to do things, especially for like a low-powered system.
Right.
So that was a huge check mark for me, saying like this kind of stuff needs to get integrated more because there's so much that can be done with this that people just seem to ignore because they say, well, you can't shoot a gun if you're sitting there reading a block of text. But it turns out you can. It's just, maybe you're not pressing an A button. Maybe you're typing in shoot gun. There's a lot of neat things there.
Right.
And I think we've, like everyone says like adventure games need to come back, and I think the 90s adventure games are dead, and I think they died for a reason, and I don't want them back. But I think what people forget is that all the great that came from that genre and that time, there's still great lessons, and they can still be applied to lots of what we do. And just people don't always, they don't take the necessary elements.
Right. What they try to do is recreate a certain, like, they try to recreate the game rather than take the element that made that game at the time so special and do it with modern things.
Right. Well, once again, it's a case of mechanics first. Like, pointing and clicking or a 2D adventure game like that is boring as all hell to me. Mm-hmm. Because it was a design born of limitations of hardware and all that stuff at the time, and it worked really well for what it was doing. But now that we have touchscreens and we have mobile devices and we have all this kind of stuff and 3DSs and whatever, the last thing I want to play is a 90s style adventure game. I always go on about Sing, who's the developer that made like Trace Memory and Another Code and Hotel Dusk and those games.
Yep.
And I have a big article on my blog where I sort of go in about them. And how I wish there's more developers like them, but that, to me, they took a lot of lessons from that era and those genres and applied them to new kinds of games.
Right.
And yeah.
Going back a little bit, you were talking about Silent Hill,
Mm-hmm.
and so Silent Hill is one of my favorite game series of all time. I just love it to pieces. And
cool.
Playing home, I was
Right.
going to ask this. There was obviously some Silent Hill inspiration there, right?
Right, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Silent Hill is, like my number one thing. I've consumed and written and read far too much information on that series.
Right. And what Silent Hill does so great is the exact same thing that Home does as well, where Silent Hill still has more of an action thing going for it. I'm just trying to think of what I'm going to say here. Like, there's enemies everywhere and you still kill them. What your game does is the same with the ambient horror type feel, where you're just uncomfortable the whole time you're playing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and for me, again, huge fan of Silent Hill, obviously, but for me, it wasn't a case of, man, I want to make a mechanically similar Silent Hill game, which is what a lot of people try to do and wonder why, it gets boring after a while, or it's just not the same thing. But the elements that you mentioned that I do love about Silent Hill, and even some of the older Resident Evils as well, but just the creeping dread, just the constant nervousness. I remember Silent Hill 1, when I played it, I played it like in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m. in the dark, just my cat, nothing else going on, and I would just terrify myself. And I played to a point where, there's the part where you get a call from Cheryl and you're in the school, and you just pick up that one phone in a classroom and she talks to you, and then you put the phone down, and I remember playing that and saying, that's it, I'm done for the night, I can't deal with this anymore.
Yeah.
Save my game, way too freaky. And it was the first game I ever played where I didn't want to do anything because I was too scared.
Yeah, for me, I always had a dread even from being a little kid of hospitals.
Mm.
And the minute you walk into a hospital in a Silent Hill game and you just see the reception area, I'm just like, oh, this is going to be rough.
Yeah.
The whole time, yeah.
Yeah, they did such a good job, but I guess what I wanted to take from that, and players can decide on whether I was successful or not, was fear, but all the fear that when you realize it, you inflict upon yourself.
Yes.
The only one that's saying you shouldn't go through that door because it's scary is you, and the only one who's afraid to follow up on a sound that you thought you heard is you. And the game is really just nudging things along. And that's another one of the issues I always take with games, where they just really try to force you to be afraid or try to make you feel certain things. But it doesn't take much. And not all players are like this. And, I know that very well.
Mm-hmm.
But especially if you like those kind of genres, you come in prepared, then when something freaky happens, you kind of just, the player puts in 50% of the work.
Right.
And you realize that, once you turn the game off or whatnot, that that fear you feel after is totally your fault. And for people who don't they don't like horror movies, or they don't get scared reading scary books, or don't have an overactive imagination, then they watch this stuff and they go, I don't get it. It's not really that scary. But if you're susceptible to that stuff, then it's a hoot. So.
Yeah, like specifically for me in Home, when the area you start off in, I wasn't very scared of at all, or the caves, but as soon as there was an abandoned factory, I was like, oh, really?
Interesting.
Yeah, it was that, I don't know why, that's what did it for me. As soon as I walk in, it's just this idea of, like, I've worked in warehouses most of my life and stuff, and there's something inherently terrifying to me about industrial buildings when there's no one around.
Yeah, we used to sneak around schools and stuff when I was a kid, and like after hours, and go to schoolyards and stuff. And there's something about offices and all that kind of jazz when no one's around, when you're not supposed to be there.
Yeah, and then I guess you mentioned Resident Evil quickly. I noticed that you put the door animation in there, and I love that. That homage, if it was on purpose.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I know, it's funny. A lot of people go online and think like I've never played Resident Evil, and they think, what a weird accident! Like, what a ripoff! How could he not realize he was doing this? But it was totally an homage. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's no loading time necessarily to cover up, but I love the tension of having to wait. And one thing I didn't do in the game necessarily was subvert that perhaps as much as I could have, because I know in Resident Evil 2 there's a moment where you open a door and this time something comes out of it, which never usually happens, and it's a great moment.
Yeah, when you go to get the valve outside in the guardhouse. Yeah,
that's right. But I just love the fact that people don't trust me, so they'll play the game, and for the whole time they'll think, no, he's going to do something here. There's something happening, and it keeps them on edge for the whole hour and a half or whatever it is.
In a way, it's almost better that you didn't put anything there, because then it really is like they're just creating their own worst enemy in their mind. More than anything, what I liked about back then, even though it was just a way of hiding loading times and all that sort of thing, and it does the same thing here, is that it gives you that 2 seconds of doubt.
Right.
Where you're just like, oh crap, I shouldn't have done that, and then there's nothing there, and you feel a little bit of relief, and you're okay again. But then you hear a noise, and it's not okay again. So,
right, yeah.
Just little things like that keep you stringing you along is what I really appreciate about Home more than anything, I would probably say.
What's good, yeah, it sounds like you're the right kind of player for the game, because that stuff, affects you in the correct way, and is giving you those correct cues. I think in Silent Hill, most of them, whenever there was a transition between rooms, the sound would always load in before the visuals.
Mm-hmm. So,
you would start to hear static, you would start to hear something moving and whatnot, and even for that split second before you got your picture, I was always going, oh man, this is the wrong door, is this the right door, what did I do, is this worse than, when I left it, all that stuff. So, it's great when people do this stuff for themselves. One thing I think about most game designers is that they always think that you have to, like, almost a system in place to deal with all these things. It's like a very proper way to look at it. You have to be able to quantify and understand that, or think that humanity is a series of mathematical problems, and if you just solve the right problems, they have the right, amount of action and fear, all that stuff. But a lot of this is just sleight of hand, pushing buttons, and I think about understanding that people are the worst people to themselves, so you don't have to do all that much. Yeah,
for sure. So we talked quite a bit about your game already. I don't want to get too far into more things, because I think it's something that, people that read the site have heard me talk before on the other stuff I've done. They know what type of gamer I am, so if you're like me, you'll probably like this game. You should just go pick it up and all that sort of thing. Just play it. I want to talk more about what has influenced you to get into video games, because looking at your repertoire here, you've done some illustration work and that whole sort of thing. So what is it about video games that got you intrigued enough to start down that path?
Yeah, well, I've been playing games since I was a kid, as young as I can remember. Started with the television, came from there. The big thing is that I do illustration, I publish comics, I've done sort of art in galleries every now and then, and things like that. But I never feel like I ever get to properly express something unless it's in a game. And I feel like it's the only medium where I get to say specifically the things I want to say. And I think it's because I know that I can provoke certain reactions out of people. In Home, I guess, is one example of that. And in a way, it's almost the only way I can communicate. Like, this is what I think when these things happen, or this is the experience that I've been through. And you can do that obviously with comics and paintings and everything else, but I find that games are uniquely suited, and for, I guess, a certain kind of emotion or reaction or a certain depth of that, I feel like they are even better at doing that than a lot of other media. So the main drive is just, when I do a comic, I feel good about it. But when I do a game, I feel 1,000 times better about it. So it just seems to be something that I can't get away from, no matter, if I don't even feel like working on a game, I have to.
Right. Sounds good. Are there any other inspirations, like besides video games, that you pull from, maybe in literature or movies or music or anything like that?
Sometimes. I mean, it's mostly just real life. That's the biggest thing. I don't really find myself necessarily inspired by movies or whatnot. I don't know, these days I'm kind of hating movies because they're all the same.
Yeah.
It just kind of bugs me. I mean, I still go watch movies, but I complain about them afterwards. It's just real life, like it's the main thing is seeing, like crazy stuff that we used to do when we were kids growing up in the country and translating that into something you wouldn't get anywhere else. I did a postmortem where I talked about home and how a lot of it was inspired by going through old abandoned houses in the country because my friends and I would do that. Mm-hmm. And, to me, that's more interesting, like getting across those wacky things that you did. I think a lot of people draw way too much inspiration from just other media, but that's not as interesting as what happened to people's real lives. You meet a lot of people, and sometimes they've led some very interesting lives or just some really messed up lives, and that's the kind of stuff you want to hear about. And that's the kind of stuff that will make new, better, more interesting, and a greater variety of games. But if everyone's just like riffing off aliens or whatever, then we're all just making the same thing over and over again.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes with how I've been thinking lately, too. I haven't read a fiction book in quite a long time. I read a lot of biographies.
Right, yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I love podcasts, especially podcasts made by people not so well known, because I like to hear their own experiences and what they've gone through with their lives. It's just fascinating. So I completely agree on that front.
Well, one of the things about like living in Toronto is I'm not from Toronto. I didn't grow up here, but it's like definitely kind of a mean place sort of city. Mm-hmm. You always need someone who's. I never meet anyone who lives or who was born or was raised downtown, which is where I live. They're either from the suburbs, from a completely different town, or oftentimes from a completely different country. And I find that's always interesting because I love meeting new people, and I love it when you come across somebody who really kind of pushes your idea of what is normal or what's comfortable. Because especially when you live in a big city, it's often easy to forget that the world is a crazy, weird place.
Yeah.
You see so much every day that you get desensitized to a lot of things. Then you meet that one person, you go, I did not know that. I did not know that people did that, or where you came from, things were like that, or whatnot. And I think people talk about Toronto a lot as kind of a hotbed for development.
Yes.
Which is true, but I think one of the main reasons is that, within a square kilometer, you'll find a whole bunch of different people who all come from different places and all have very, very opposing or, wacky ideas about the very same thing. And like most of the people that I know in the industry here, if we talked about a lot of game-related stuff, we mostly just fight.
Okay.
Because neither of us like the same things. Most of us have very strong opinions about different things. And I have some very good friends in the industry. We just don't talk about games too much because we kind of know, like, I know you hate this, and I know you hate this, and I know that if I say that I like this game, you're just going to say it's garbage, and there's no point arguing about it. But I understand why, because their background's different, or like they're more into math or something than I am. That kind of makes it fun.
Yeah, for sure. So, since you're from Toronto, like I've talked to quite a few indie developers from Toronto. Do you go to the game jams or any of that around town?
Sometimes. I don't go to them anymore, only because of time. And I figure if I'm working on a game, I should be finishing stuff I have to do for my own. I feel guilty when I'm not. Yeah. But that's where I started, and that's where I got my start doing any game-related stuff. And there's lots of events that happen here. And there's a collaborative workspace here called Bento Lisa, and they host events all the time. Last week we just did a event for my students that I teach at local university for game design, for them to do a showcase. So most of the folks that I meet, we kind of just, I don't always see them every day, but we just hit up all these places, and reconvene at these events and see how everyone else is doing.
Sounds good. Okay, well, I think that's about all the questions I really had for now. I guess I've been asking everybody this, and I've been getting pretty much the same answer, but if you were to give any advice to somebody that wanted to start their own indie game or do games at all, what advice would you give them?
The advice is to start right now and make a game. Don't think about it, just do it.
Yeah, that's what everybody says, too.
Find a game jam, do whatever it takes, but the longer you wait and plan, it'll never get done. It should take 3 days to make your first mess.
Right.
And then go from there.
Another thing that people usually add is that no matter how shitty you think something is, just finish it, get it done, and then start on the next one.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So I guess we could just set it in stone there.
Yeah, you can call that 100% truth.
Yeah, there hasn't been anybody that has disagreed, so
funny.
There you go. So, all right, so thank you again for taking time out and talking to us. I absolutely love your game for a lot of this stuff it does that. I've been reading some reviews, and some people just don't get what you're trying to go for, and it's kind of infuriating, but I mean, people will be people, and that's whatever.
Right.
But yeah, it's really interesting to play a game that really is less of a game than more of a narrative experience or journey, I guess.
Right.
And it's nice to see that every now and then in between the shooters and that whole thing. So anybody wondering where they can get your game, reach you, your website, do all your plugs.
Sure, yeah. Best way to reach me if you ever need to see what's going on is follow me on Twitter @BenjaminRivers. Want to grab the game, go to www.homehorror.com, and of course it's available on Steam, and that website will link you there as well. I'm on Twitter every day, making a fool of myself constantly, so by all means, if anyone wants to get in touch, go there.
All right, sounds good. And for Pixel Response, I'm Paul, and I'll see you guys later.
Great, thanks very much.